Have you ever thought about starting your own podcast? If so, why haven't you started yet? Maybe it's because you're not sure where to start. Well, I've got some good news for you. With the You Can Podcast Now online course, I show you step by step how to begin your podcast and produce new episodes week after week. For some free information, visit youcanpodcastnow.net.
Get ready for your weekly dose of pixie dust with Dizney Coast to Coast.
Hey folks, and welcome to Disney Coast to Coast, the ultimate unofficial Disney fan podcast. I'm Jeff DePaoli, and today on the show I have Mark from Yesterworld returning to talk about The Lion King. Hello Mark, and welcome back.
Hey Jeff, how's it going? Thanks for having me again.
Of course, I had a fun time talking about Aladdin with you, the live-action Aladdin. So today we're going to talk about the reinterpretation, the reimagined Lion King. So let's jump into that conversation right now.
Grab some popcorn and silence your cell phones, because it's time for the Disney Movie Review.
The 1994 animated epic film, The Lion King. Do you have any memories of the first time you saw this film?
Not the first time. It was a huge part of my childhood and growing up, but I don't remember the first time. I remember I wanted to see it in theaters, very badly, and there was some reason why we couldn't. So I don't think I saw it in theaters when it first came out, which is why I was so excited however many years ago when the 3D version came out. So I finally got to see the original in theaters.
Yeah, that 3D version, we'll touch on that a little bit later. But yeah, 94, I must have I'm pretty sure I saw this in theaters. In fact, I know I saw it in theaters, but for some reason, I don't have that vivid memory of seeing this movie in theaters as much as I have the vivid memory of buying the cassette tape. And
the soundtrack. The
soundtrack, listening to the music of The Lion King, that I remember was a really, really, really big deal. And and this movie was huge. I mean, epically huge. It's made... And it was not supposed to be. That was kind of the funny thing. Of course, back in 94 when we were kids, we didn't know any of this stuff. But this was considered the lame movie if you were working on it at Walt Disney Animation. The one you wanted to be working on was Pocahontas, yeah. And essentially Team B was working on The Lion King. So it's almost as if they had something to prove. Know, these young animators who, didn't get the A movie, they got the B movie, and they're like, well, let's just make it as amazing as it can be, and they certainly did.
Right.
Now, this one's pretty high up on your list, right, as far as favorites go?
Yeah, I mean, I've always said it's not only my favorite Disney animation of all time, but my favorite of any animation of all time. Because like I said, even though I don't remember seeing it for the first time, just from the games to the merchandise to, I think I saw... they had, not when it was on ice, but they had some show of it when I was a kid, and the soundtrack especially over and over. Even before I got into movies and scores, I was obsessed with the music. And yeah, it's always been one of those movies I can just watch over and over and over again. And I watched it this afternoon to kind of freshen up. And it just doesn't get old. I think it's got the perfect runtime. It has amazing pacing. If anything, it's almost a little too brisk at times, or too fast maybe.
Sure.
Which they tried to fix with the new one, but that's a whole other thing to get into. But yeah, I that and Aladdin have always been my top two. But Lion King, there's not that scene in Aladdin that hits me in the feels like it happened several times in Lion King.
Yeah, it's funny. I rewatched it recently as well, and it kind of hit me, especially when I was seeing the live action one. I kind of love how, and I would love to know who made this very simple decision, but to start the movie with a sunrise. Every version of The Lion King starts with the sunrise, whether it's the original animated film, the Broadway musical, this reimagined film. It's kind of funny because if you see the right kind of sunrise, whether it's on National Geographic or wherever, you kind of think of The Lion King, or at least I do.
Right. Yeah, it's just a very iconic shot. And I guess it makes sense because the whole, circle of life and things beginning. And so it makes sense. But it's just such an iconic opening and that music is just incredible. You know, like from the second it starts, I think that's the other thing where it's not like Aladdin where it kind of builds up to the music and builds up to the Arabian Nights. It's like, boom, second the movie starts, you're in it, you know?
Yeah, it's true. It's true. It's funny as I rewatch this film, there's quite a few things I know. Like one of the things you don't get as a kid and you do as an adult watching it is that the amount of wisdom in this movie, whether it's Mufasa or Rafiki especially, there's just like a lot of great pull quotes that are like inspirational that you could totally see, hanging in somebody's office. And there was a smart group of people making this movie. I think it's incredibly evident of that fact. And, you know, it certainly paid off. What is it? Today, worldwide, this movie, the original animated movie, has made over $968 million. So they're not so far from that $1 billion.
Is that adjusted or unadjusted for inflation?
I think that was unadjusted, although I'm not 100% sure.
Yeah.
Pretty sure that was unadjusted.
Either way, it's
like that's a
incredible.
lot of money for a movie that I think was like $46 million budget or something like that.
Well, like you said, they were just, this kind of ragtag group of people putting, which is why the production was so chaotic and, influences that may or may not have come from certain other cartoons. It was just such a, like a ragtag group of people. They didn't, they were banking on Pocahontas being the one that was, going to do that, similar numbers.
Yeah, I can't sit through Pocahontas.
I haven't seen it in years.
I've tried over and over and over again. I just fall asleep every time.
I love the music, but that's
I do too.
All I remember from it.
That's the best part of the movie. The music is fantastic. I mean, it's Alan Menken, right? Like, it's fantastic music in Pocahontas, but I don't know. It is interesting to me that, like, there is the cool movie Pocahontas and the dud Lion King, and they couldn't have swapped more opposite in my mind. But in any case, as you were rewatching this animated film that you've seen 1 billion times recently, is there anything that stuck out in particular to you?
Just a lot of stuff in comparison to the live action, because I saw the live action 2 days ago. Yeah, just more in comparison, because again, I've seen this movie so many times. So it was mainly just things that would happen. I'd be like, oh, that's interesting. I mean, I guess the two, and again, it kind of compares to the live action, is one, how incredibly vibrant it is, especially Pride, Pride Rock and the Pride Lands.
Pride Rock is unbelievable. And I had that thought as I was seeing it in the animated film. Like, Pride Rock is so beautiful. I cannot believe it hasn't been recreated at Disney's Animal Kingdom. And I've said this in the past, but it's kind of shocking that they haven't created a Pride Rock, because it's stunning. At least on the Kilimanjaro Safari or something, I've always wondered why they haven't made a Lion King attraction where, I think if you did it, I don't remember if it was here, but I know I've mentioned where if you did it in the style of the Winnie the Pooh adventure ride, I think it could work. If you, simple kind of figures and maybe some that are animatronics and some that have some movement. I've always been shocked they never made a ride out of it. Yeah, now, of course, this film is 25 years old at this point, but, I mean, they may not have had a ride, but they have had, ever since this film came out, I don't think Lion King has ever left the parks. I mean, of course, today we still have Festival of the Lion King at Animal Kingdom, and we've had parades, and we've had other stage shows, and there's a dance party. There's a whole celebration going on right now for the 25th, and yeah, I mean, that's pretty wild to think that, no pun intended, but it's pretty wild to think that 25 years this film has had representation in the Disney theme parks. It's an incredible success. I will say something, watching the animated film again recently, and you can tell me what you think, but how necessary is Rafiki? I know that sounds like an insane statement from just as a blatant, but I was watching it and I was like, he really doesn't do much, and honestly, I shouldn't say that. He does very important things, but nothing that somebody else couldn't do. And also, he just says things that I'm kind of like, what's going on? Like that moment when he realizes that Simba is still alive. And I guess if you suspend your disbelief and he catches that feather in the air or something and does a potion, and he's like, oh my goodness, he's still alive. Okay, first of all, I'm like, that's random. Like, what? But then he goes, it is time. And I'm like, time for what?
If I remember correctly, I think he had a bigger role in the original scripts. So maybe that can account for it.
That may be true. That would make more sense to me. And then he also goes and like tells Timon and Pumbaa that Simba has like returned to the Pride Lands, and it's just like, well, wait a second. Did Simba tell him to do this? I don't think he did, because Simba's surprised to see them all show up. So he's like a very mysterious character, and I get it. He is a mysterious character. It's kind of like one of his traits. But I don't know. Just watching it again recently, I was like, this is a very strange character that I'm not 1,000% sure is necessary, other than the fact that he spouts like insane amounts of wisdom.
Well, he's like the shaman or whatever, where you imagine that he kind of hides in his home, 300 days of the year, 360 days of the year, and then comes down for the 5 days where he's needed to perform rituals or ceremonies. And so that's how I've always kind of viewed him as, like, even though I think merchandise would rather have you think he was a more integral part of the movie, to me, he comes when he's needed, and he's like that person that, like the monks that live in, wherever they do, and they only come down when, they're needed, versus, like that he lives among everyone.
Yeah, that's a good way of thinking of him. And it is funny that you say, merchandise wants you to think he's a bigger character. And I would say so do the parks, because he's one of the few walk-around characters that you see.
Right.
And
mainly because he's the only one that can actually walk on his hind legs.
Him and Timon, and they're both like, grossly oversized. But that's many, many, many characters. So, but you did mention the 3D re-release. And what was this for the 20th anniversary? Was it 5 years ago they did this? That would probably make sense.
Yeah, I think when they did it in 3D. Yeah, I think that was.
So you were excited for that because you got to see it on the big screen that way, and I'm curious. Well, I went and saw it on the big screen this way, and when I went, I probably hadn't seen the film in years, because it was just so like ingrained in my head as a kid that I had never thought to pop it in more recently. And I went, and I was blown away. And I'm not like one of these 3D guys. Like, it doesn't.
Yeah, same here. Yeah.
But I love. And I think they did it with Beauty and the Beast as well. I love when they take the 2D animated films and make them 3D, because it layers them like a pop-up book, and it's a very, very cool and unique look, in my opinion. What did you think of it?
I agree. I'm not a huge 3D fan in general. Most of the time I see movies in 2D, but I remember when I saw The Lion King in 3D, it was incredible. Like the way they... when it was perfect in terms of just adding depth, and instead of having anything pop out of you or anything, it was just perfect in the way that it just added more to the movie and made it more immersive, but it wasn't in your face or anything.
Yeah. I
always rank that among like my favorite 3D, post conversions like that. And Titanic is another one where they just did, an amazing job with it.
Yeah, I would totally agree with that. Now, of course, you actually just did a really great video called The Lion King Lie on YouTube. And I was wondering if you wanted to touch on this real briefly. It's obviously a very long story. You made a great video about it. I would suggest that the listeners go and check it out, The Lion King Lie on YouTube. But do you want to just like mention briefly what that was all about?
Yeah, it's just kind of, long story short, people started saying, oh, well, this is very similar to a TV show called Pumbaa the White Lion that came out in the 60s. And it was a Japanese television show that was, dubbed over for the U.S. And it ran in the 60s and was broadcast mainly then, but it also kind of was on a few stations up until the 80s. And so when The Lion King came out, people all of a sudden were saying, well, this is very, very similar. And then Disney was denying it over and over again. First, they're like, no, the guy who made it, the creator, so it was Pumbaa the White Lion, or Jungle Emperor Leo in Japan. It gets really confusing because there's a lot of different name variations and versions. But basically, it was Pumbaa the White Lion, or Jungle Emperor Leo in Japan. And then Leo the Lion, which was like the later show. Onward Leo, I think, was the second one that only broadcast in the 80s once. Again, people should watch the video because it gets so confusing. But long story short, Disney at first said, no, we've never heard of Tezuka, which is the guy who created the series. And then, no one on our team has heard of him. No one knows what the show is. And then animators start saying, well, I know what it is, and they knew what it was, and I knew people were holding up stills for comparison. And then they kind of said, oh, some knew who he was, but it didn't have any effect on the story. And it just kind of, when you look at the evidence, there's no, like, in my opinion, they didn't, like, steal it, because a lot of the story is Hamlet and Moses and the Bible. But in terms of influences, it's pretty obvious the animators and storyboard artists were maybe paying it more of a tribute, and then it just kind of snowballed out of control.
Yeah, some of the shot-by-shot comparisons are like undeniable when you compare them, which is crazy. But it's an interesting story. So like I said, go check out The Lion King Lie from Yesterworld on YouTube. But let's talk about the 2019 reimagining. Of course, at first everybody was calling this the live action Lion King because that's the trend right now. It's not. Everybody I think knows at this point that the entire film was made inside of a computer. So I mean, technically, it's made the same way that Frozen is made, except for the fact that it's a very different style choice and everything looks real. So It was directed by Jon Favreau, who did very similarly this with The Jungle Book that he did. The difference with that was there was one live actor in it, but everything else was created inside of a computer. And I think he said there's one live shot in this film. Did you hear him say?
Oh, really?
Yeah,
I didn't hear that.
There is one. If you had to guess, what do you think the one shot would be? Because when I heard him say that, I did have one thought. I honestly don't know the answer, but my guess is the sunrise at the beginning.
I could see that. Yeah.
For some reason, I just feel like that first shot of the sunrise is a real shot. Because an interesting thing here is that, like, when I saw that shot, it didn't feel as grand to me as the animated one.
Yeah, nothing did for me. But
Well, that specifically, I mean, like we were talking about, that sunrise is such an epic moment in the animated one, and it just really gets you going right from the beginning.
Well, even the light rays, I don't want to jump ahead, but even the light rays coming down in the sky.
Oh, under Pride Rock, you mean?
Yeah, like just and I know lighting's trickier in animations, but yeah, I noticed the same thing too.
Yeah, but so I feel like if the sunrise had been made in a computer, I think they would have made it a bit more grandiose. So I think that I could be wrong, I don't know, but I think the sunrise might be the one real shot in the film. Otherwise, entirely made in a computer, which is a really impressive thing. I mean, there's no denying the fact that these animals look like, and these environments look like they're from a National Geographic documentary. Would you disagree with that?
Oh, no. I agree 100%, because I think even people that have issues with the movie, there's just no denying how incredible it looks and how photorealistic it looks. And yeah, they did it in Jungle Book, but I guess it's just on a more grand scale, and you don't have a live actor to kind of maybe having a live actor would have been harder, because then you have a direct comparison. But yeah, there are some shots, I don't know why, but certain shots and specifically just, I was like, I just can't believe we're at this point with technology. Like, it just blew my mind.
Yeah, it's crazy. I mean, we essentially don't need actors anymore to be seen on screen. We can create pretty much anything. So it's a little wild. But this is interesting because the first reaction I got to The Lion King was at the D23 Expo in 2017. Did you happen to go to that at all?
No, but I remember, I think, seeing the trailer or the clips or whatever came out at the time.
Yeah, so they showed us pretty much the whole opening sequence, which was pretty much a shot-for-shot remake of the animated film for the whole Circle of Life sequence. And this film has been so interesting to me to watch just the opinions of, because when they showed that at the expo, I feel like everybody's minds were blown, and everybody got like that nostalgic gut punch that was like, this is incredible. And this film, leading up to it, I feel like got really great buzz from the beginning, which was like the opposite of Aladdin.
Right. Like, I remember on Rotten Tomatoes, it was saying the first like when the reviews came in, it said, critics are saying it's Disney's best movie yet. And I was like,
Interesting.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's interesting.
Or not best movie yet, but best live action
live action remake, recreation, live action in quotes. But in any case, so it was the opposite of Aladdin. Aladdin got the bad buzz, and then it came out, and I feel like people are like, "Ooh, this was actually way better than I expected." And now with Lion King, I feel like the opposite has happened, where the buzz was really good, and now it's come out, and people are like, maybe not so great. So that's just kind of interesting to me that happened.
Yeah, I agree. I think it's different because, well, it gets into the movie, but I think like one thing I've kind of said overall is that I can see, even though I had issues with Aladdin, I could see how someone might want to sit down and watch the animated version, but then maybe they'll be in the mood later or another day for the live action one just to see a different thing. But with this one, because they're both animated, they're just different forms of animation. I can't imagine there being any instance where someone would be like, I want to watch this one over the other one. They're both animated,
Yeah, it was interesting because, like, I don't think it was nearly as emotional as the original film.
Oh, no.
And Billy Eichner, who is the voice of Timon in this, he said something, I think it was him, who said in an interview, he said, you have to think of this like a Broadway revival. This is the same script, it's the same story, it's just a new interpretation of it.
Right.
And I thought that was a really interesting comment. And honestly, something I'd never thought of before. I am a huge theater fan. I see many revivals, and I have no problem with revivals. I have no problem with people taking the same book and making their version of it.
Right.
Yet, I am very much not a fan of it when it comes to film, and I'm kind of curious where you stand with that. Are you a theater person at all?
No, not really.
Okay.
I've seen very few plays, musicals.
Okay.
I did like musical. I may have seen like Phantom of the Opera and all that, but nothing.
Yeah.
I'm not a huge musical fan. I guess one thing I would say that for me, I think what made it more enjoyable is that from the very beginning, I was like, okay, this is going to be a shot-for-shot remake. I was like, I was pretty sure it was going to be a shot-for-shot remake, and then because it's too much of a risk, it's kind of a lose-lose scenario for them. Either they change too much, people get mad. They change too little, people get mad. So it's like, okay, they're going to go on the air of caution and just not change anything. And I was like pretty sure that was going to be the case. Mm-hmm. And the other thing is from the trailers, they were doing so much to avoid showing any of the characters talking. I was like, okay, there's going to be a big issue with the characters conveying emotion because they're really trying to avoid that. So I guess because I went in and it's a horrible mindset, but to go in thinking they're not going to change anything. It's going to be the same thing, almost like a reskin, and there's going to be far less emotion than the original. And going in with that, I was fine. I enjoyed it. I mean, that's not a good mentality to have to go into something with. But I think because I had that in my mind, I'm not, because I tend to be more critical and cynical with movies. But I feel like a lot of people are acting surprised. I just thought, no, I didn't expect anything more than that,
Yeah, I would pretty much agree. It's exactly what I expected it to be, which is it's a good movie because The Lion King is great. Like, the story of The Lion King is great. So, there's that saying that you can have a great script and the movie will be okay, but if you have a bad script, no matter how good the movie is made, it'll still be bad. So, like, it all starts with the script. So the script of The Lion King is fantastic. So it's a good movie. It just doesn't have the power or the emotion behind it that I feel the animated film does. But back to the Broadway comment he made, like it being a Broadway revival, real quickly, I just want to touch on the fact that for me, the reason why Broadway revivals are okay is because when a show is done on Broadway, when it closes, you'll never get that again. Like, you may see a video of it or whatever, but you're never going to get the intended performance of the show again. It's gone, which is why revivals are necessary on stage. With film, I don't think revivals are necessary because we can always go back to the original film, especially in this day and age where everything's being saved digitally. Film isn't being destroyed or anything. So I guess that would be my argument, but he's right. It is. It's like a Broadway revival in the sense that it is the same script. There are some minor changes that the director decided, and it's exactly like as if it were a stage show. So I thought that was interesting. But lots of shot for shot. If you're familiar with the animated film, you're going to see stuff. You're like, oh yeah, I remember that exact angle, that exact shot. It just looks more real now. So
there was one element of the movie. Because in watching it again, I enjoyed it for what it was, but I would say that there was nothing that was better. Like even with Aladdin, I'm sure you could find one or two things saying, "Oh, I think they kind of did this better." With this one, the problem is there wasn't anything that, in my opinion, they did better. But one thing, I wouldn't use the word better, but I did like that they expanded the dialogue in places.
Sure.
They expanded, because in the original, because Lion King went through a ton of revisions, the script. In the original versions, the whole Scar kind of wanting to make I always forget her name, Sarambi, Simba's mother, his queen. They kind of brought that back, and that's from the original versions of the script. Nala leaving Pride Rock to get help, that's from the original versions of the script. So I did appreciate that they did that. And then the other thing was in the beginning, after Simba's baptized or whatever you want to call it, I liked that they did expand Scar's kind of motivations, because I always thought he wants to be king, but that's a lot to kill his brother. But in this one, he added a line, and I'm not sure if it's a form of retcon or if people are mad because maybe, I don't think in the original movie they ever alluded to where he got his scar. And in this one, they allude to it being Mufasa, because he says something like, and this is in the cartoon, he says, or in the original, he says something like, "I would never challenge you. You got the brute, I got the brains. I would never challenge you." But in this one, he's like, "Again," and you're like, "Oh, so that's probably that a fight to see who is the strongest." And then, so that was like the one thing I was like, okay, I think that's the best. I wouldn't say improvement, but in terms of adding something, that was the one thing I was like, okay.
That's interesting that you mentioned that, because the very first interview I ever did here on Disney Coast to Coast was with the actor Patrick Page, who at the time he was playing Frollo in The Hunchback of Notre Dame on stage, but he played Scar for a very long time. And we got into a conversation about Scar, and he mentioned he was creating backstory for the character, and he theorized that Scar got the scar from Mufasa.
Yeah.
So it's interesting that may have been in some of the original source material as well.
Yeah, I'd have to go back, because I have like two of the original, or not the original, because there's a lot of rewrites, but two of some of the earlier versions. And I would be surprised to look and see if maybe there is a line about that.
Yeah, it makes sense, right? It totally makes sense. It's interesting. Scar also had a moment, I will say, I keep saying I didn't have the emotions I had during the animated film, but there was a moment where I actually felt a little bit bad for Scar in this film.
Yeah.
And it's before he killed anybody.
Right.
But there is that moment where he's talking to young Simba, and I forget exactly what Simba says, but it's something like, it's kind of weird that I'm going to be your king someday.
Yeah.
And Scar just had this line where he goes, "You have no idea." But he said it in a way that was like, you know what? That really is kind of painful to just think. I mean, you feel like you're inheriting this thing, and then one day it's all taken away because of this baby that comes up. I don't know. I felt a little something for Scar.
And that's what I kind of agree with, that, because a lot of people are just like, oh, this is the abomination. And again, comparing it to the original, it'd be like a 3 out of 10, just because it didn't do anything better, really.
Yeah.
But on its own, I enjoyed it for what it is. No, not a 3. I don't know. It's a very tough movie to grade, because you have the amazing visuals. And in terms of the story, it's a good story. It's just, where do you rank it in terms of just, it'd be like if they reshot The Shawshank Redemption, right? And they redid it, and everything's just as good. You could rank it really low for being like, oh, they didn't bring anything new to the table. I didn't feel anything because, they didn't do anything better. Mm-hmm. But it's like, well, it's almost impossible to give it like a grade, because unless you're just giving it on the whole kind of cash grab, reskin aspect of it alone,
Yeah, I mean, it's a completely, people argue this statement, but it's a completely unnecessary movie, and people will argue, oh, well, what movie is necessary? And me personally, I feel like art is necessary, entertainment is necessary. It's like a reason to live, otherwise we'd all be very bored people. So I think entertainment is important and necessary. I think what people mean when they say this is unnecessary is, once again, just pop in the original film. I am curious, though, to see in like 10 years or so, talk to any kids that maybe this is their first introduction to The Lion King, but I gotta be honest, I don't know if a kid would want to sit through this, though. Like, it's just not a kid friend. It's like watching a nature documentary, and let's face it, I don't know about you, but I can like remember older cousins and older family members watching nature documentaries and stuff and being like, what are you sitting here watching? This is insane.
Right. Well, and the other thing too, in terms of how it compares, or in terms of kids enjoying it, because that's one thing that I noticed when rewatching the animation, the original, is like Pride Rock looked so gorgeous, and there's a lot of greenery, and the sky is blue, and the light rays, and when Simba and Simba and Mufasa are walking through the Pride lands, like it's just so gorgeous. And then when he comes back, there's like that stark contrast of how everything's just dead. In this one, though, there wasn't that contrast because the Pride Lands kind of looked, I guess, maybe more realistic, but just very dry looking, very brown. It's just, it didn't have that color. And I thought maybe they did that to try to contrast the area Simba grows up with Timon and Pumbaa. Yeah. But like, I feel like for kids, they don't have that popping of colors to keep them interested in the... in the original, the facial animations are so expressive, but you don't have that either for kids to follow. So I feel like for kids, maybe it'd be harder to kind of visually stay in the game if they're, not old enough to understand the story.
Yeah, now this film was made so that everything was extremely realistic. Like the animals, other than talking, they don't do anything that these animals couldn't do. You don't get Timon in a hula skirt doing a dance. Like that's just because animals don't do that. So even the surroundings, the nature, were colors that are real to nature as opposed to this animated, vibrant colors that they decided before. So that's that's an interesting choice. I mean, it differs from the original, so I guess that's where it was different. I do want to go all the way back to the beginning real quickly because, as Disney fans know, all of these films start with a castle, and in more recent years, they've done really creative things depending on the film. Sometimes it'll be Beast's castle or whatever. It's related to the film. What was this castle at the beginning of this movie?
I thought I was kind of confused as to what it was as well, because it almost looked flat and 2D, two-dimensional. So I guess it was harkening back to the original, but I wasn't sure.
It was strange because normally it's Cinderella Castle that we see. I should say normally in the last 10 or 15 years. Before that, the classic one, the blue one with the stripes, was Sleeping Beauty Castle. So this was Sleeping Beauty Castle. So maybe, as you said, maybe it's a throwback to the original animated film. But it was jarring because it felt very unrelated to the film. And that was a little bit surprising, I will say. There are some nice, funny jokes in this film. I love the fact Zazu, John Oliver, who has the show on HBO, he was great. And I love the fact that he's the guy reporting the news. That character of Zazu does the morning report in the film. And he made a comment I'm reporting the news. And I'm like, yeah, well, that's what John Oliver does for a living. So this is kind of fun.
Yeah, I thought he was the best in terms of voice. We're not the best, but in terms of vocal casting, he was one of the best in terms of I couldn't really see anyone else doing that voice.
Sure.
I was kind of hit or miss with some of the others. I mean, of course, Timon and Pumbaa, Seth Rogen, and I forget the actor's name.
Billy Eichner. I thought Billy Eichner as Timon was phenomenal. Yeah. He was probably my favorite. Seth Rogen, not so much.
Oh, really?
Yeah, well, here's the thing. I really enjoy singers, and I like singers who can sing. And the amount of
Rogen can't sing.
Seth Rogen can't sing at all, and there's nothing wrong with that, but he can't, and it's a musical role, and they had to change so much of the music. He has a 5-note music range. It was pretty bad. Yeah. But on the other hand, Billy Eichner had this singing voice that I was like, holy crap. I had no idea he had a voice like that. And like to the point that I was like, if he was putting on a cabaret show, I would totally go and see Billy Eichner perform. I thought that he was fantastic in the role of Timon. And, you know, I love the original. Nathan Lane as Timon is great. You might say they were kind of similar vocal qualities in a lot of ways, so maybe that's why I enjoyed it so much. But singing-wise, Billy Eichner was even better than Nathan Lane. Like, it was... Yeah. I loved it.
Well, to me, and even just in general, Timon and Pumbaa had the most charming segments of the entire movie. And it was funny because in the theater, I was thinking, you know, everything's been very forced to, like, it almost felt like they had to stick to the original script. And when Timon and Pumbaa came in, there was a lot of fourth wall breaking and a lot of jokes that alluded to, you know, the animation when, you know, he doesn't cut himself off from saying every time I farted or whatever. And he's like, you were supposed to cut me off. And I was thinking, I bet this is improv. I bet and I looked it up, and it turns out that they had them do it like once by the script and then like once improv, and that's the version they went with. I was like, of course, the charming, like most immersive part of the movie in terms of the characters is the one where they let him go off the script, you know? And I always heard Seth Rogen, like anytime I hear Seth Rogen, you know, it's like, like it just pulls me out.
His voice. Yeah.
So then it's like, oh, that's Seth Rogen. You know?
So one of the great moments for Timon and Pumbaa, at least I thought it was a great moment. A little bit earlier, I was talking about the hula dance from the animated film, which is not part of the film. But this was shocking to me, where they break into Be Our Guest from
hilarious,
Beauty and the Beast. And I was like, Alan Menken does this a lot, or I guess this is Alan Menken doing it because he had nothing to do with this film, but...
Very old school Disney. They used to do a lot of self-referential stuff, little nods, you know.
Well, the fun thing is the original Lion King has a self-referential moment like this, but at a totally different moment. Do you know what I'm talking about? With Zazu?
Oh, It's a Small World.
Yeah, when Zazu sings It's a Small World, there's that reference, and that does not exist in this remake, but the Be Our Guest moment does. And it reminded me of an Aladdin on Broadway in the musical. There's a whole sequence during Friend Like Me where they break into a ton of Menken music, and he does little moments.
The criticism, you know, because like I said, I tend to be very cynical and very critical, as I was with Aladdin. But I feel like with this one, again, I think if you're reviewing it, you either review it as a movie on its own or just flat out say, I can't rate it because I'm going to compare it too much to the original. Yeah. Because it's just, and not saying that you can or can't, but I feel like it's weird because I thought I was going to hate it based on everyone. But I was going to say, when they break out in the Be Our Guest, I've heard people say like, oh, that's so dumb. That's so like dumb. It's like, you do realize they did the It's a Small World thing in the original. Like, I think sometimes, or I heard one person saying that, you know, oh, they didn't rescore anything. They literally just took the soundtrack and put it on the movie. It's like, no, they rescored almost every track, and you could tell that there were little nuances that they would lead in. You know, they would kind of put different parts of the song earlier and later. So, you know.
It was minimal, I will say. I mean, I'm sure if you sit down and compare the two, there's quite a few differences. But as a
ton,
I didn't,
and I've listened to it over and over and over again. But like now, like in terms of the overall themes, yes, it's all the same. But in terms of like mixing in parts from later in the movie, unless I'm just crazy, but
no, you're probably right. But like, I love movie scores. I listen to movie scores over and over. As I mentioned, one of my first memories of The Lion King is getting the cassette, so I'm very familiar with the score. But I did think to myself, I'm like, honestly, if they wanted to save money, they could have taken the original soundtrack score and mixed and edited it in different ways. It didn't sound any more grandiose or anything like that, which is something I'm always hoping for when I see remakes or something come from stage to screen. I'm always excited, like Cats, which looks horrible. This trailer of Cats, which could be a whole conversation on its own. But first, well, I'll go on this tangent for a second. You saw the trailer for Cats, yes?
Yeah, I'm still trying to wipe it away from my, my retinas.
Exactly. So I started watching the trailer for Cats, and I was like, oh, I am not finishing this. And I literally like shut it off for whatever. I was like, this is horrifically bad. I can't watch this. And then, of course,
I've never seen Cats, though, so I'll just put that there.
It's a terrible show. I can't stand Cats except for the music, which
I
is
love
where
that
I'm
song.
getting with this. Yeah,
The memory, yeah.
Well, Memory is actually probably one of my least favorite songs on the show. But in any case, so of course, I stopped watching the Cats trailer because I didn't want to see anymore. And what do they show before Lion King but Cats? I was like, great. So now I'm being forced to sit through this. Equally as horrible if you watch the whole thing. But the one thing I will say is, as I was watching it, going from stage to screen, the music of that show that I do like, it sounds so much better because it has a full orchestra. So that's what I'm always excited about with remakes. I want to hear those beautiful scores with like a huge orchestra, which of course you don't get in a theater most of the time. So in any case,
I agree. In terms of its being any more grand, like, I guess for me, what I was referring to is just, again, the little changes, and that you could tell that they reworked it. Not as much as like the overall sound, because it sounded pretty much identical.
Yeah.
But there were just some people that just said, "Oh, they didn't even bother re-recording it." It's like, well, they did, and I guess they tried, because there are certain parts where you could tell they added, what do you call that? Like a motif. When I'm horrible with terminology, but when you take like a part from the later in the score that's maybe darker, and they kind of do it in a different way earlier on, it's kind of like foreshadowing. I noticed that they were doing more with that than in the original. So that was a credit I kind of gave it.
Now, when it comes to the music, I will say I was tremendously bummed that they didn't bring in anything from the Broadway musical. I know you're not super familiar with it, but there is phenomenal music in the musical, and it's a bummer that they didn't bring at least one or two songs from that into it. But they bring in this Beyonce Spirit song that I hated. Like, not talking about the song, I don't care about the song, whatever. But in the film, I was like, and maybe it's just because I'm so familiar with The Lion King, it felt way out of place. It felt like a pop song. And I know Elton John... Yeah, I know Elton John wrote the music. He's a pop artist. I get it. But the music in The Lion King isn't pop music, in my opinion. Yeah. It's more musical theater. Whereas this Spirit song felt like a pop Beyonce song. It did nothing for the film. It's there so that they can, so that they are eligible to be nominated for an Academy Award. That's all it's there for. And I hated it for that reason.
Well, that was my problem with her. Like, in terms of her performance, she was fine. But one thing, it's kind of a weird nitpick, but that bothered me. Well, number one, when they sing "Can You Feel the Love Tonight" and it's in broad daylight, that's a very perplexing decision. But the fact that, like, it really should be "Can You Feel the Love Today."
I had never thought of that at all. So in the animated film, it's nighttime, I assume.
It's like dusk.
Okay.
It's like, there's golden. It's not like this where it's like, "Can you feel the love tonight?" Well, it's like, no, I can't, because you're singing it during the day. But
that is the best nugget of information to come out of this podcast. I did not notice that at all. I love that. That's beautiful. Continue.
Like, it kind of segues into the night in the original, which is, because after they meet up, that's when he meets Rafiki. But in this one, it's just broad daylight. But my problem with it was that in the animation, when they're singing it, and they're both very good singers. I forget the names of the people that sing it. Very good. And Beyonce is like, an incredible singer, obviously. But she was singing "Can You Feel the Love Tonight" as if it were a song going on an album. So there's a lot of that, like, like a lot of I can't
riffing.
do it because I'm not a singer. But the thing is, that took me out of the emotion, because when you're singing in a movie, you're supposed to be conveying emotion. You're not supposed to be like, I'm a singer making a song for an album. And so it took me out, because Donald Glover, like, he was doing a very good job, but she was almost like overpowering him by her kind of riffs that then took me out, because you're trying to convey emotion. You're not trying to convey, here's the range I have. Does that make sense?
It absolutely makes sense, but I'm sure the Beyonce fans don't care. Like,
oh, yeah. No,
I'm sure they got what they wanted. I'm from the camp of I don't understand the whole, like, Queen Beyonce mentality. I think she's fine. I have nothing against Beyonce whatsoever. People love Beyonce, and
right.
I don't particularly understand it, but that's just me. I'm in the minority there, I think. As far as music goes, and "Can You Feel the Love Tonight," I gotta make a confession. I don't particularly like this song. It's probably my least favorite song on The Lion King. And I know it's the song that won the Academy Award for Best Song in a Feature Film.
I love the Elton John version.
That is my favorite version, the credits version from the original animated film. That's the best version of the song. But I don't know. Even in the Broadway musical, like I can vividly remember, this was like 20 plus years ago, 22 years ago at this point, I saw it on stage. And I remember even during that sequence being like, kind of boring. Just rewatched the animated film, kind of boring. And the live action film, or the reimagined film, kind of boring. I don't like this song. It's so weird. It's such a classic Disney song. The worst in the movie. I'll go on record saying it.
I'm the same way. Well, not for that, but more of just I prefer the Elton John version of Circle of Life, and I prefer the Elton John. Those are two of like my favorite movie songs of all time, or Elton John's versions of, which is why I was pretty disappointed when his song was very underwhelming that he sings in the credits.
Oh, yeah.
I was like, it just sounds like take it or leave it. And that's kind of what I felt. I guess I haven't mentioned that with the voice acting in general. And I know other reviewers have said the same thing, where they were probably given the direction of kind of restrain your emotion because we're not going to be able to convey it. And I don't know if that's true, but I felt it. And even someone as amazing like James Earl Jones, I felt like he was kind of delivering everything more flat. And everyone was just, aside from Timon and Pumbaa, just everyone kind of felt flat. And Chiwetel Ejiofor is a Scar. He also kind of felt, there was no like, he was just kind of, I don't know, it was really weird. I just wanted more emotion, but then I get it because then maybe it'd be weird because the lions aren't able to convey emotion much.
You wanted it to be more animated. That's what.
Which is obviously that's the benefit of hand drawn when you don't care about if it looks cartoony, is you're able to have so much more expression, and that's why like Mufasa's, like I told myself before the movie started, I'm like, okay, if Mufasa's death scene doesn't do anything for me, like if I don't tear up, that's kind of when the movie lost. And I didn't tear up. And anything I felt was me projecting my feelings of the original animation. But then like rewatching that scene today of the animation, like I was tearing up so much, like because you can't convey that the way Simba's. And it was kind of rushed over too. He like pats him once and it's done. But in the cartoon, he's like pulling at his ear and he's like, and he goes under his paw and it just like breaks my heart every time.
Yeah, I will say like Jonathan Taylor Thomas's performance in the original animated film, it's really superb in my mind.
Yeah,
I know he was cast because he was famous at that point, but like he gives a really good vocal performance. I love it.
I didn't like I hate to like bash on kid actors, but I liked the voice of Nala, the child version of Nala. I couldn't stand the voice of Simba personally.
Oh, well, I was indifferent. I had no opinions of it.
It was just very, I don't know. It's like, it didn't, I couldn't quite pinpoint what it was. Maybe it was kind of, everything kind of had an uptick. Mm-hmm. And there was just like, I don't know, it's just, I never felt, his voice just annoyed me. And I know he's supposed to be kind of an annoying character, but Jonathan Taylor Thomas, I guess, just had this certain, I don't know, maybe it is that there was more emotion. This one, it was just more like, hey, I'm doing this. Hey, like kind of just going all over the place. And I don't know, it didn't, I like Nala, but it didn't really do anything for me.
You blame the director for that, not the kid actor. Blame the director. But I will say, like, Mufasa, the great James Earl Jones, I kind of the way that people are like, oh, they could have just taken the music from the original and put in this, that I kind of wish they did that with Mufasa's voice.
Yeah, I had that thought earlier today.
I was like, his performance in the animated film is better, in my opinion. Listen, part of it is he's an older gentleman now. Yeah. Like, he is not the age he was. Voices change. He sounds like an older man, I think, in the new film. But his performance in that original is stupendous. And there was so little dialogue change that, frankly, I feel like they could have worked around what they already had. So I don't know if it was... I mean, I guess that's a bit disrespectful, but I guess, if they're going to pay him the same anyway, he probably was like, yeah, that's fine. You want to use the old stuff? Go ahead.
I feel like if they had done... I did have that thought, but then I thought, again, like, I could see if they did that, people being... even more like, oh, it's just a cash grab. They didn't even bother re-recording.
Yeah, but they cast the same guy in the role. I mean, it's as lame as that.
It was more of a, I think he said in the interview, it was more of a legacy of a passing of the torch, which probably means they're going to make another one or something.
Wait. Repeat what you just said? What?
Like something like a legacy thing, like a passing of the torch is the wrong phrase, but almost like because he was so iconic it was just like I'll have to look up exactly what he says, but there was
I
a
think
reason behind
it.
it.
It legitimized it. That's it legitimized this remake. It was like, well, if James Earl Jones is going to be involved, it must be good. And yeah, I don't know. It was interesting. I will say there a great moment that I think actually was done better than the animated film was the moment when adult Simba talks to the ghost of his father in the clouds. Mm-hmm. I loved that lightning cloud and the way that you really only saw Mufasa in it when the lightning struck.
Yeah.
And
I liked it because it forced you. I mean, again, this is something I've seen a lot of critics say, like, "Oh, it's terrible. You didn't even see his face in the sky." That would not have worked. It would not have translated well.
You saw it enough, in my opinion. I definitely saw the outline of Mufasa.
But having his literal face would not have translated well. It would have been corny. Again, you can do it with the cartoon, but I liked that it forced you to kind of pay attention.
Yeah.
In a way, because you would just subtly see it. So I liked how they did it. I think that's probably the best way they could have done it. So for people that are, and there are other moments like that I feel like I know people were really upset that Be Prepared was shortened to a kind of monologue-y kind of thing. I liked it because...
I think it worked.
Again, nothing's better than the original, but in terms of this, number one, the whole Nazi thing would not have flown over well. And it wouldn't even work with the whole realism thing because hyenas don't get on their hind legs and do the march. That's super controversial. But in terms of the smoke and the... watching it today, I was like, there's no way they could have done this without making it a cartoony. It wouldn't have worked. So I think they did the best they could in making it work for this format. And again, that's why I feel like I'm not as harsh on this as other people are, because I just saw things like that. I'm like, should it be done? Probably not. But if you're going to do it, that's probably the best you can do it. Or the same thing with the Timon and Pumbaa, in the jungle scene. Oh, it was hilarious the way they did that. And gave me kind of a startle when, because I kind of got into it and I forgot that Nala was going to come in.
The whole Be Prepared thing, as I was rewatching the animated film, I was reminded it's the most theatrical of the songs in the film. It's like you said, with the smoke timed with the music, I could totally picture the fog machines blasting on stage and stuff, and going for the realism. They didn't do that, but similarly, I just Can't Wait to Be King has a very stylized look in the animated film, and I love it. It works great in the animated film, but in this, since they were going for realism, there's none of that. Right. And I don't know if I didn't dislike it. It didn't bother me. It was definitely different. And I would say I prefer how the animated one goes a little bit out there with it, but it worked. I thought I Just Can't Wait to Be King worked really well in this film.
And that was the one that for me, I thought, again, I don't know how they could have done it. I guess it was fine. I think it's an impossible thing. A lot of these aspects to translate to the I always say live action, not live action, but that's what everyone's saying. But to translate it to this new version, it would have been, to keep the whole photorealism aspect, or just, I guess photorealism is the wrong word, because you can have something like Toy Story that's photorealistic in terms of the cloth of Woody's jacket, more of just photorealism, realistic. There's got to be some word for it where it's not only are you trying to make everything look like it's an actual tangible object, but you're also not going to make the cartoon like an Aslan from the Lion, Witch in the Wardrobe.
Yeah.
So yeah, I guess that was probably, if I were to choose a musical number I thought was the most underwhelming, it would have been Can't Wait to Be King. Personally,
it was definitely the most different from the animated film, for sure. Because, it's super animated. It's a completely different style from the rest of the animated film, even. It's interesting. Yeah. I remember as a kid, it actually kind of bothered me that it was so different, but now I kind of like it. And even in the Broadway musical, it's very different style. Like, the puppets that they use have they're done in very traditional earth tone type of designs for the most of the puppets, but when they get to that number, they go out there with wild patterns and brighter colors and stuff. So it's something that's been kept with the Lion King, but now that's changed. That's interesting. One thing that we get in the reimagined Lion King that we don't in the original, which is delightful, is a baby Pumbaa.
Yeah,
oh my goodness,
that's pretty cute.
that was the cutest, because when they're singing Hakuna Matata, they're talking about some stuff from the past, and the animated film is just the same age or same size anyway.
Right.
But a baby Pumbaa, so cute. Yeah. I love that.
That's really all the charm of the movie came from Timon and Pumbaa, and even though it kind of was weird that they broke the fourth wall, even more so because I think there's a line where once they get to the end of Hakuna Matata, Pumbaa says something like, "He's grown like 400 pounds since the song began." And I was like, that might be pushing it a little bit, but it was still funny. And again, I think they had good chemistry back and forth, and the fact that it's improvised is not surprising at all to me.
Yeah, I hope that those two recorded most of their stuff together. I don't know for sure. It's very often.
They did. I'm pretty sure they did, because they wanted to pay tribute to the way Nathan Lane and I forget the name
Ernie
of the
Sabella.
other. Yeah, I'm pretty sure they did. And I don't know. It's hard to say like it's a pure cash grab of a movie, but I think I look at it as like cash grab, but also mixed with almost like an experiment where they wanted to see what it would be like to just reskin. It's like
Here's the thing: when you use the term cash grab, like I think it's the studio cash grab. I think, the people making the decisions to greenlight these movies are doing like every movie. They're looking at spreadsheets and deciding what's a guaranteed win, which is what, every studio making a movie thinks they're making a guaranteed hit, or else they wouldn't be making it. But the people involved creatively, I don't think Jon Favreau's like, I need more money, so I'm going to direct The Lion King. Yeah. I don't think any of the actors feel that way. I think that they're like, gosh, I grew up loving this movie and I want to be part of this. So, I don't think you can use the word cash grab and it's not an umbrella statement. It's the people at the studio. Yeah, they did it for the money. They, there's a reason why when one of these work, they make 1 billion of them, because they know it's like printing money. And every once in a while you'll get a Dumbo where it doesn't work, but for the majority of the time it's working. And it's an enjoyable movie. I will say, if somebody was like, hey, we're going to the movie theaters right now, you have 2 options. We're going to go see Aladdin again or Lion King again. I would probably go see Aladdin again, which really surprises me. But I was just very meh about the Lion King.
I don't know. It'd be hard for me to say because, again, I had a lot more. That's the funny thing, too, is I had a way more. Like, I could go on an hour of all of my issues with Aladdin and the things that bothered me, but maybe it's because they did play it so safe that it's hard to do that with The Lion King, because it's not like, oh, they changed this, they added this, they did this wrong. They did it so safe and so by the numbers.
Yeah, it's boring.
And so it's like so there's really not much I can complain about, whereas with Aladdin, so I don't know, like, I mean, either way, it's like I'll watch the original versions. There's not a single Disney live action remake that has come out that I would be like, actually, no, probably Jungle Book is the only one that I could see myself saying I'd watch the new one over the original, because I was never a huge fan of it growing up. That's pretty much it.
Cool. Anything else you want to add about the reimagined Lion King before we jump into some trivia here?
I don't think so. Like I said, it's one of those movies where there's just not a ton to criticize, because if you're criticizing the movie, you're kind of criticizing, I guess the only thing that kind of bothered me that they did differently in this one is when, Simba comes back and he, kind of Scar makes him confess, and then Scar's holding Simba over the edge and he says something like, I remember the look in Mufasa's eyes. And then like a few seconds later, I think it's Sarami's like, how could you have known the look in Mufasa's eyes? It's like, well, how did you even hear him? He was like whispering it to him. And why didn't, when he said that, you go, wait, why are you saying, it's like the point of her was like, how could you have known that if you were there, if you weren't there? But then Zazu was there and he knew he was at the gorge. And they're like, I don't know, there were a few things that didn't quite add up, because Zazu, I don't know why Zazu was like, oh yeah, Scar was there.
Because he was locked up all this time. Zazu was in the
original, he like makes him go unconscious, and that's probably how he justifies not telling the Pride, oh yeah, Mufasa did this thing. But he's like, I don't know, maybe I missed something, but that was the only like disconnect where I was kind of confused, like, well, why didn't Zazu say anything? And also Rafiki, just how he's like, when he grabs his staff and he's like, hello, my old friend. It's like, we didn't even get to see you do anything with it. So it's like, as an audience, it was really awkward. Again, I think had they had more of him from the original using his staff, that would have maybe made sense. But it was kind of a weird line.
I will say, Rafiki's become a very mysterious character to me after watching both of these more recently. I was like, Rafiki. All right. I need to pay more attention to this guy. He's interesting, and I'm not quite sure why he's necessary, other than the fact that he's kind of a fun, wild character. But
yeah.
I'm sure there's somebody out there right now listening yelling at me because they love Rafiki, but so I apologize.
Like I said, I think he had a bigger presence in the original script version. So
yeah. Anyway, I think that means it's trivia time. All right, Mark, do you want to hit me with a trivia question first, or shall I hit you?
I'll hit you with one.
Okay.
This one's more obscure, so I'm not sure if you'll know it, but do you know the name of Nala's brother that was in the original versions of the script and even is in concept art? And there's a ton of like renderings that you can find online of him. So the name of Nala's brother that was cut from the movie during the later stages, but made it pretty far into development.
Nala's brother's name is Yala. I just made that up. I have no idea.
Close. It was a Me Too, which it would have probably
Me Too?
It's pronounced like Mewtwo, but Me Too. But it's
gosh,
Me
I
Too.
wish that was in the new film. A character named Me Too.
It might be more like Me Too, like the emphasis on
Me Too.
But I was like Me Too, like that would have symbolized 2019 for
yeah. That would have been pretty funny. Okay, so I got a question for you. It is a theater-related question, so I apologize. I know you're not a huge theater fan, but one of the shows was a mega pop culture hit, so hopefully you've heard of it. But the question is, in the original Lion King, the animated film, there are two performers who do voices in that film who went on to become like a Broadway power couple. They've done 3 shows together on Broadway. One of them was a mega, mega, mega hit back in, 2001? Something like that. Do you know which 2 actors I'm talking about and perhaps that mega hit show?
I'm not even going to bother guessing because I know I'll be wrong.
One of them was Nathan Lane, who's the voice of Timon. Any guesses on who he might have become a huge... They became a huge... Think Mel Brooks.
Oh, the producers.
The producers with Nathan Lane and...
I know it. I just can't...
Matthew Broderick.
Oh, Matthew Broderick. Yeah, that's right.
Yeah, he's the voice of adult Simba in the original
I've
film.
never seen it. I just know of it. So.
Well, like I said, it was a huge pop culture hit. So, yeah, Nathan Lane and Matthew Broderick were in The Lion King together. Probably never recorded anything together. Maybe they did, but quite possibly didn't. But they were in the Lion King together before, quite a few years before, about 6 or 7 years before the huge Broadway hit The Producers. And then after that, they've kind of been paired together several times because, like I said, they've become this like unofficial power couple where they did The Odd Couple together. And then most recently, I think it was in 2015, they did a play called It's Only a Play. So, yeah, fun. I always think of that when I hear their voices in The Lion King. I'm like, oh, yeah, they'd go on to do The Producers and, like, change Broadway history. That's kind of cool.
Yeah, it would have been interesting if they just were like, we're bring everyone back. Like, Nathan Lane, bring back Matthew Broderick. But
it would have been interesting, and the James Earl Jones thing to me is very interesting. And it's one of those things like, well, who else could do that? But at the same time, we all said who else could be the genie, and guess what? They figured it out. They, whether we like it or not, there is another genie now. There could equally as easily be a new Mufasa. Who it would be, I don't know, Gilbert Gottfried. Well, let's just stick him in there as Mufasa.
You always like to throw him in there as a potential casting choice.
Exactly. Okay, Mark, thanks so much for coming on the show. Why don't you remind folks where they can find you to find all of your fantastic work?
Yeah, thanks for having me. Always love talking movies with you. You can find me on YouTube. It's just Yesterworld Entertainment. I think it's just youtube.com/Yesterworld Entertainment. But if you just type in Yesterworld, you'll find me. You can find me on Twitter at Yester_world. And you can find my co-host of the podcast we do, who also does content for the channel on Twitter at Yester_world_Q. And you can check out our podcast as well. I think most of the videos have a link in the description where you can find that. But yeah, it's pretty easy to find me. So just type in Yesterworld and you'll get something pop up.
Excellent. And for all of the Disney Coast to Coast social media, head to DisneyCoastToCoast.com. You can find links there. And while you're there, sign up to get your free gift of America's Hidden Mickeys. It's a list of lesser-known Disney destinations around the USA that you, as a Disney fan, would probably like to check out. So simply head to DisneyCoastToCoast.com and click on free gift for that. Other than that, folks, have a magical day. Bye!
Thanks for listening to Disney Coast to Coast. Have a magical day.
Disney Coast to Coast is produced and hosted by Jeff DePauli. Learn more about the podcast and become a supporter at DisneyCoastToCoast.com.